Snowflakes drifted down like scattered ash as Amara gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Her warm breath clouded the windshield as she scanned the blizzard for the house she'd only ever seen in pictures. Finally, her headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a weathered garage door flanked by rising mounds of snow. She let out a long, shaky sigh. This was it. Something like a home. She cut the engine but remained in the driver's seat, her fingers trembling just over the ignition. Atlanta was in her past now. 6 years, an engagement that ended before it began, and a wound so deep she still felt its sting. All I want is to vanish, she thought. Here, at least, no one knew how foolishly she had trusted him. And her. Fighting back a fresh wave of tears, she snatched her bag and plunged into the biting cold. The frozen ground crunched under her boots while the wind whipped her face and sent her dark curls flying. Her hands fumbled with the keys, her heart thudding not with anticipation but with pure, soul-deep exhaustion. She could still hear his final words hanging in the air. "I'm so sorry, Amara. It wasn't planned. We never wanted to hurt you." She had offered no reply, simply turned and walked out of her own life. Now, she twisted the key and pushed the door open to her rental. The interior was dim, with bare walls and floors coated in a thin layer of dust. Everything seemed suspended in time, untouched. She dropped her bag, her fingers grazing the textured fabric of an old sofa before she moved to the window and pulled back the flimsy curtain. Outside, the garage stood as a silent sentinel in the swirling snow. Suddenly, a faint metallic sound, a soft scrape, made Amara's entire body go rigid. She froze, her gaze locked on the garage. Was it just the wind? Another scrape followed, this one louder, like a tool dragging across concrete. Her heart leaped into her throat. Instinctively, she grabbed a baseball bat that had been left near the door, a memento from her college days, and cautiously stepped back into the storm. The snow hit her cheeks in harsh little stings as she crept toward the garage. The door was open just a crack, a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Her grip on the bat tightened. "Is someone in there?" she called out, her voice shaky but firm. "I'm armed, and I will defend myself." The only answer was the howling wind. Then, a shadow shifted within the darkness. Slowly, a man emerged into the sliver of light, hunched against the cold and draped in tattered layers of clothing. His beard was full, with tiny ice crystals clinging to the ends. He raised his hands slowly, palms facing her. "I was just trying to get warm," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Just for the night." Amara stared, her pulse hammering in her ears. Every survival instinct screamed at her to slam the door, run inside, and dial for help, but she found herself hesitating. Something in his tone, in the weary slump of his shoulders, suggested a burden far heavier than the snow. His eyes, deep-set and gray, met hers. They weren't menacing, they were just tired. She let out a sharp breath, lowering the bat ever so slightly. Just for one night, she thought. No trouble, no mess. He gave a quick, grateful nod. She pulled the garage door open a little wider and stepped back. "There's an old quilt in the corner. I'll get it for you." He paused on the threshold, a man clearly accustomed to rejection, before finally stepping inside. Amara went back to the house, returning moments later with the quilt and a sealed bottle of water, which she handed to him wordlessly. "I won't be any trouble," he murmured. "See that you aren't," she replied, her tone softer than she intended. "Just one night." He nodded again and retreated to a corner, wrapping himself in the thick quilt. She watched him for a moment more before closing the garage door, the click of the lock echoing with unnerving finality. Back inside her house, she leaned against the door and squeezed her eyes shut. "What in the world are you doing, Amara?" she whispered. But as fear whispered its doubts, a different feeling stirred deep within her. It was a small, tentative warmth, like a door creaking open not just in her garage, but in the most guarded corners of her own aching heart. Amara awoke early, the house wrapped in the quiet hum of the heater and the lingering unease of the night before. She padded barefoot into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from her eyes as she prepared a pot of coffee. The rich aroma soon filled the small space, a comforting and familiar scent. A part of her assumed the man would be gone, having vanished into the pre-dawn darkness like a phantom on the wind. But when she glanced through the kitchen window toward the garage, she stopped cold. The floor, which had been littered with dust and forgotten boxes, was now immaculate. The quilt she had provided was folded on a wooden crate with perfect, crisp edges. It was a fold of military precision, the kind her father, a retired Marine, had taught her, not a skill learned on the streets. Her eyes drifted down from the window. On her top step sat a small ceramic mug, a lazy curl of steam rising from its contents. It was hot cocoa. There was no note, no message, just the silent offering. She picked it up and took a tentative sip. It was rich and dark, not too sweet, exactly how she liked it. Amara stared at the garage for a long moment before walking over, knocking softly, and then pulling the door open. He was sitting on a folded tarp in the corner, lacing up a pair of worn boots. He looked up, startled, then scrambled to his feet, adjusting his layered clothing. "Morning," he said, his voice less raspy than the night before. "You cleaned," Amara stated, more an observation than a question. "It was the least I could do." "For your kindness," she paused, her gaze thoughtful. "And you made cocoa," he nodded once. "I saw the container in the pantry window. I hoped you wouldn't be upset." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, she asked, "Do you need another night?" He looked down at his boots, letting out a slow breath. "If it's no bother. Just a few more days. I'll stay completely out of your way." Amara's cautious nature battled with a newfound sense of compassion. After a beat, she nodded. "All right. But no surprises." "And no one else, I understand," he replied, and for a fleeting moment, she saw a flicker of profound gratitude in his eyes. The following days settled into a strange and unexpected rhythm. Each morning, she would wake to find the walkway had already been cleared of snow. On the second day, she heard the quiet clinking of a wrench from the kitchen and entered to find him fixing her leaky faucet. He stood up abruptly, starting to mumble an apology, but she simply gave a slight nod and allowed him to finish. Later, she watched from her window as he helped Mrs. Adebayo, the notoriously grumpy elder from across the street, carry heavy bags of salt up to her porch. Amara nearly spilled her coffee when she saw Mrs. Adebayo offer him a genuine, heartfelt smile. The woman hadn't smiled in years, a permanent fixture of neighborhood gloom, yet this quiet stranger had somehow broken through her hardened exterior. They began to talk, their conversations unfolding slowly, hesitantly. She offered him toast one morning, and while he declined the food, he stayed to chat. Another day, he commented thoughtfully on the books she had left scattered on her coffee table. One evening, they sat on the back porch, each wrapped in a separate blanket, watching the snow fall in companionable silence. When she brought up music, his eyes seemed to ignite. He spoke of classic jazz with the passion of someone who understood every note. When she mentioned her favorite painter, he recited a line from one of their interviews. "You've read that?" she asked, surprised. "A long time ago," he said with a faint, wistful smile. "I used to love art. I suppose I still do." Amara found herself anticipating their quiet exchanges. There was a familiar quality to his speech, not just educated, but deeply considered and measured. More than once, she wondered about the man he was before the worn-out clothes and the deep weariness in his eyes. He never volunteered his name, and she never asked again. But his presence began to fill the empty spaces in her house in a way that felt oddly comforting. He made no demands, he never intruded. He simply existed. And somehow, that was enough. She realized one afternoon that she had smiled more in the last few days than she had in the last 3 months. Strangely, she felt no guilt about it. Whatever this man was running from, it was clear he was a person of deep thought, patience, and a quiet, unassuming kindness. Amara couldn't explain it, and she didn't try. For the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel so alone. The wind howled, rattling the old window frames as the small town went dark. House by house, the lights on her street blinked out, leaving only the ethereal glow of the moon on the snow-covered ground. Inside her little rental, Amara stood at the window, watching the skeletal branches of the trees claw at the stormy sky. The power had died 20 minutes ago, blanketing everything in an unnerving silence. She draped a heavy blanket over her shoulders and moved to the fireplace. After several frustrating tries, she finally got a small fire going, its flames crackling to life and casting dancing shadows across the living room. A soft knock sounded at the back door. Amara opened it to find him standing there, hands shoved deep into his pockets, his breath a white puff in the frigid air. "I saw the power went out," he said. "Thought I could help, but it seems you've got it handled. Come inside," she said after a moment's hesitation. "It's far too cold out there." He paused, then stepped over the threshold, carefully stamping the snow from his boots. She gestured toward the hearth. "Sit down. Get warm." He nodded, removed his tattered coat, and settled on the edge of the rug near the growing flames. Amara sat opposite him, and for a long while, neither of them spoke, allowing the crackle of the fire to fill the quiet space. The shifting firelight played across his face, accentuating the lines around his eyes and the deep weariness etched into his expression. She found herself studying him once more. "Do you ever feel like life just snatches you up and drops you somewhere you never intended to be?" Amara asked softly, surprised to hear the words spoken aloud. He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Every single day," she pulled her blanket tighter. "I had a whole future planned out. A wedding in the autumn, children a few years after, a home filled with books and art." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Then one day I came home and saw him holding her, my best friend, as if I were a ghost. Just like that, the entire plan disintegrated. I fled the city, left it all behind." He remained quiet, his eyes fixed on the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and resonant. "I had a life once, too. A name that people knew. There were spotlights, applause, cameras. I was somebody, until I wasn't." Amara's eyes widened slightly. "You were famous." He offered a small, dismissive shrug. "I suppose. Depends on your definition. But the louder they clapped, the more of myself I lost. I looked in the mirror one morning and had no idea who was staring back at me. So I walked away." She studied his profile in the firelight. "You sound like an artist." His eyes met hers for a beat before glancing away. He smiled faintly. "Something like that." She tilted her head. "What was it you did? Painting? Music?" "A bit of everything, and a whole lot of nothing," he replied cryptically. "I made things. Then I destroyed them." His voice was heavy with an unspoken story, and Amara felt a strange ache in her chest. He spoke not as someone looking for pity, but as a man confessing a long-held truth. "What's your name?" she asked gently. He looked at her again, that same tired gaze meeting hers across the flickering light. "Just someone passing through." Amara didn't push. She let the silence return, heavy and intimate, like a fresh blanket of snow covering a field. The fire popped, sending a spark spiraling upward. "You know," she said at last, "I thought I came here to forget. But maybe I came here to remember who I was before all of that." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes the quietest places are where we can finally hear ourselves think." They sat like that for a long time, two strangers connected by their fractured pasts and the unspoken comfort of the other's presence. Not another word was spoken between them that night. None was needed. The fire continued to burn. The world outside was still, wrapped in a blanket of fresh snow that had fallen through the night. Amara woke for no reason, stirred not by an alarm or a sound, but by a strange, hollow feeling in her chest. She sat up, blinking in the pale morning light that filtered through her curtains. The room felt colder than usual, and the silence was different, it was empty. She pulled on a sweater and slippers and moved toward the back of the house. The floorboards creaked under her weight as she passed the kitchen. She glanced at the counter. There was no mug of cocoa. Her hand rested on the doorknob, a sinking feeling telling her what she would find. The cold bit at her cheeks as she stepped outside. Snow crunched under her feet on the path to the garage. The door was ajar, just as it had been the night she first found him. With a racing heart, she pulled it fully open. It was empty. The wooden crate where he used to sit was bare. The tarp he had meticulously folded into a mat was gone. There was no sign of him, no boots, no quilt, no trace of warmth. The garage felt like a discarded shell, hollowed out and lifeless. Amara took a hesitant step inside, her breath forming a cloud in the frigid air. Then she saw it. Resting on the crate was the scarf she had given him. It was folded with care, not discarded, but deliberately placed. Beside it, a small rock held down a piece of thick, high-quality paper. With trembling fingers, she picked it up. It was a drawing, rendered in exquisite, soft graphite strokes. The image was her. Unmistakably, it was Amara, curled in her chair by the window with a book open in her lap. An imagined light streamed from the window behind her, casting her face in delicate shadow and light. The expression he had captured was one of peace, a profound calm she hadn't realized she possessed. But he had seen it. He had captured it. Amara pressed a hand to her mouth, her knees suddenly weak as she sank onto the crate. The drawing shook in her grip. She stared at it, and as she did, the tears began to fall, silent, hot tears that tracked through the cold on her cheeks. "He saw me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He saw me in a way I'd forgotten I could be seen." The ache that followed was sudden and overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion she couldn't hold back. She wasn't crying simply because he was gone, though that hurt. She was crying because, in the few short days he was there, he had noticed her, truly noticed her, in a way no one had in years. He had seen past the walls she'd built, past her pain, and found a quiet dignity she thought she had lost forever. He had seen her not as a woman who was broken or abandoned, but as someone who was still whole. Amara clutched the drawing to her chest, closing her eyes. "Why did you leave?" she asked the empty space. The garage, silent and still, offered no answer, only the sound of more snow falling softly outside, a hush that wrapped the world in stillness. She remained there for a long time, perhaps hours, the drawing never leaving her grasp. The days passed like melting snowflakes, slowly, silently, and leaving almost nothing behind. Amara fell back into her routine, coffee in the morning, short walks in the snow, reading by the window. But the atmosphere in the house had changed. It didn't feel empty anymore, just incomplete. She found herself glancing toward the garage more than she cared to admit, a foolish hope flickering that she might find him there again, with his quiet presence and those deep, searching eyes. But the garage remained silent, hollow. The drawing found a home on her nightstand. She studied it every evening before sleep, memorizing every line, every graphite stroke that had managed to capture so much more than her likeness. It had captured a version of herself she didn't realize she missed. One morning, after weeks of quiet contemplation, she carefully wrapped the drawing in brown paper and drove into town. The local art and framing shop was a cozy space tucked between a bakery and the post office, its windows fogged with warmth. A small bell chimed as she entered, shaking the snow from her coat. An older black man with silver-rimmed glasses stood behind the counter, slightly stooped but with alert, kind eyes. He looked up and gave her a polite smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Amara gently unwrapped the drawing and laid it on the counter. The man leaned forward, his friendly smile slowly fading into an expression of awe. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the edges of the paper as if it were a sacred relic. "Where," he asked quietly, "did you find this?" Amara hesitated. "It was a gift." From someone who stayed with me for a while. The man stared at the image, a glint of moisture in his eyes. He pointed to a simple, almost hidden signature in the bottom corner. J.K., do you have any idea who drew this? He asked, his voice now hushed. Amara shook her head. He never told me his name. The man let out a slow, shaky breath and looked up at her as if truly seeing her for the first time. This is the work of Jelani Kofi. I would recognize that hand anywhere. She blinked, confused. Who is that? The shop owner's voice softened with a mix of reverence and sadness. He was a meteor in the art world, about 5 or 6 years back. Young, brilliant, incredibly intense. His portraits, they didn't just capture a face, they captured a person's entire soul. Then one day, he just disappeared. No more shows, no articles, nothing. He came out from behind the counter and went to a small file cabinet, returning with a faded gallery poster. It showed a photo of a man in a sharp suit, his gaze directed just past the camera as if he were already looking for an escape. The eyes were the same. Amara's heart did a painful somersault in her chest. Jelani came into this very shop once, the man continued. Carried an old leather satchel and a sketchbook. Asked if I had any charcoal or ink for sale. Said he was leaving the city for good, that he was done with it all. The man swallowed hard. He broke down crying, right here at this counter. Said he was finished with painting, that he had nothing left inside worth saying. He sold me his last fountain pen, the one he used for his signature. Said he never wanted to hold it again. Amara gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. Why would someone with that much talent just vanish? The man shook his head, a look of deep sorrow on his face. Some artists just carry too much of the world inside them. Eventually, the weight becomes too much to bear. She left the shop in a daze, the newly framed drawing wrapped securely under her arm. Back home, she scoured every corner of the internet she could find. There was nothing. No social media, no recent news, no contact information. It was as if Jelani Kofi had meticulously erased himself from the world. And yet, he had been right here. In her garage, in her home, in her life. It came on a Tuesday, tucked between a bank statement and a grocery store flyer. It was a single envelope of soft, cream-colored stationery, with no return address. Her name was written across the front in a familiar, bold black ink. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of matching thick paper. The note was brief. If you still have the drawing, bring it. J.K. No address, no date, no explanation. Just the command. Amara stood frozen in her kitchen, the air trapped in her lungs. She read the words again and again, as if they might change, but their stark simplicity remained. For what felt like hours, she simply sat at her table, the letter lying before her. By evening, the silence in the house had become a roaring in her ears. She paced the length of the living room, the note clutched in her hand, her mind a storm of questions. Was it truly him? Was this some cruel, elaborate prank? What could he possibly want? Her gaze kept returning to the framed drawing on the wall, the one he had left behind like a whispered secret. Every time she looked at it, a painful knot tightened in her chest. It was more than a picture, it was a memory, a connection, a piece of her that no one else had ever seen. And now, he was summoning her back into his world, the very world he had so desperately fled. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, sleep an impossibility. The letter lay on her nightstand, a silent taunt. If he only saw me as a subject, she whispered into the darkness, then what does that make me now? A muse? A model? Just another moment in his process? She pressed her palms against her tired eyes. But what if it was more? What if there was something real between them, and he had simply walked away? Her thoughts circled endlessly, replaying every quiet glance, every unfinished sentence, every shared silence that had felt so deeply understood. But had it been real? Or had she projected a depth that wasn't there because she was so desperate to believe in something again? The sky outside began to soften into the pale blue of dawn. Amara was still sitting up, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes heavy but clear. She stood up. She walked to the wall, unhooked the frame, and carefully removed the drawing from behind the glass. She rolled it gently into a protective tube, folded the letter, and tucked it into her coat pocket. Then she packed a small bag. Because in the end, this wasn't about art, or a famous name, or a signature on a piece of paper. This was about her heart. And her heart demanded answers, even if those answers were destined to hurt. Even if she was only ever inspiration. She had to know. The streets of New York City hummed with a vibrant, electric energy, the city lights painting long, shimmering reflections on the wet pavement. Amara stood outside the gallery, her heart hammering against her ribs, her hands clutching the rolled-up drawing like a prayer. Through the tall glass doors, she could see elegantly dressed people mingling under crystal chandeliers, their voices a low murmur. The sign above the entrance read, "Her Light, a solo exhibition by J.K., Her Light." Amara took a deep, steadying breath and pushed the door open. The space inside was hushed and reverent. The walls were lined with canvases, large, intimate, and utterly breathtaking. And every single one of them was a painting of her. Amara blinked, a wave of shock washing over her. There she was, sitting by the living room window, bathed in the soft glow of morning. And there again, standing in the snow, her coat pulled tight, her face turned upward as flakes drifted down around her. Another canvas captured her laughing, her head thrown back in a moment of unguarded joy she barely recalled. Her throat tightened. These weren't just paintings of her face, they captured her very essence. Her stillness, her resilience, her grief and her healing, all intertwined on canvas. He had seen things she thought were invisible. As she moved from piece to piece, she could hear the whispers of other guests. "She's magnificent," someone murmured. "There's so much life in these. You feel as though you know her." Amara finally reached the last painting, which was set in a quiet alcove under a single, focused spotlight. This one was smaller, the mood softer. As she stepped closer, a sharp gasp escaped her lips. It was a painting of her asleep. She was curled in her armchair, a blanket draped over her shoulders, her face illuminated by the flickering light of the fireplace. Her features were serene, peaceful, and vulnerable in a way that felt almost sacred. Amara's hand flew to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes and began to stream down her cheeks. She hadn't even realized he had seen her like that. Behind her, the low chatter of the room began to fade. Footsteps approached, and then she heard his voice. "Thank you all for joining me this evening." She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. There he was. Jelani. He stood under the gallery's main light, dressed in a tailored dark suit, clean-shaven and composed. But his eyes, they were the same. Deep, quiet, weary, and still his. He looked out at the assembled crowd. "My name is Jelani Kofi." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. "Some of you might remember me," he continued, his voice calm and clear. "The press called me a lost talent, a man who walked away from his own gift. The truth is much simpler. I was a man who had forgotten his reason to create. I had stopped seeing the world. I had stopped seeing people." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room until it found her. "Until one night, I found myself in a small town, with nothing, trying my best to disappear. And a woman, a stranger, let me sleep in her garage. She asked for nothing." Amara felt the weight of every gaze in the room shift to her. She willed herself to stand still, but a tremor of emotion ran through her. Jelani looked directly at her now. "She didn't know my name. She didn't want anything from me. She just offered me warmth. And in her quiet world, I began to see again. To feel. To remember why I ever picked up a brush in the first place." He gestured to the paintings around them. "These are not just portraits. They are fragments of what I saw when I looked at her. Her strength, her sadness, her immense kindness. Her light. Silence descended upon the room. Then, a single person began to clap. The sound was joined by another, then another, rising until the gallery was filled with a wave of applause. Amara stood frozen, silent tears tracing paths down her cheeks as strangers applauded a love story they couldn't possibly understand, but somehow, deeply felt. Jelani stepped down from the platform and began to walk toward her, the applause fading into a distant roar in her ears. But Amara couldn't move. Not yet. Amara slipped out of the gallery into the cold night air, the noise and brilliance of the exhibition echoing behind her like a fading dream. Snow had begun to fall again, the soft, quiet flakes muffling the sounds of the city and making everything feel surreal. She walked without direction, the tube containing the drawing pressed to her chest, her breathing shallow and uneven. She had just seen her private life transformed into public art, her quiet moments, her pain, her joy, all rendered beautiful and meaningful. It was overwhelming, deeply moving, and utterly terrifying. She loved him, she knew that now. But a painful question remained, had he loved her, or had he only loved what she represented? Was she the woman he saw, or just the vessel for his resurrected muse? She turned onto a quiet side street, away from the traffic and the lingering gallery crowd. The snow was thicker here, crunching softly under her boots. Amara, she stopped dead. The voice was unmistakable, raw and familiar, cutting through the cold. She turned. It was Jelani, running toward her through the snow, coatless, his dark hair already dusted with white. He slowed as he approached, stopping a few feet away, his expression uncertain but resolute. "I couldn't let you leave like that," he said softly. Not without me saying what I should have said weeks ago. She remained silent, simply watching him, a tempest of emotions churning just beneath her calm exterior. He took a careful step closer, as if approaching a skittish bird. That garage, it was more than just shelter. It was the one place on earth where I wasn't Jelani Kofi, the prodigy, or the failure. I was just a man. Cold and lost. "And you opened the door," his voice cracked. "You didn't just let me into your garage, Amara. You let me into your world. You saw me when I couldn't even see myself." Amara swallowed hard, but her own voice was steady when she spoke. "And you saw me more clearly than anyone ever has," he nodded, a look of profound regret in his eyes. "But I left without a word. I was scared. Not of you. I was scared of what I was feeling, of what I was starting to want. I thought if I stayed, I would ruin everything. Ruin you." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "You already broke something, I know," he whispered. "And I am so sorry." He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small, flat package wrapped in brown paper. "I drew this before I left. I wasn't going to show it to you. I didn't think I deserved to. But I want you to have it." She took it, her hands shaking as she carefully unwrapped the paper. Inside was another drawing, this one rendered in soft graphite and gentle watercolor. It was of the two of them. They were standing side by side in front of the garage, the sky behind them awash in the warm colors of a sunset. Their faces were turned slightly toward one another, their expressions captured in a soft, peaceful smile. It was a moment of perfect harmony, of love. Amara stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. "It's not a masterpiece," Jelani said quietly. "But it's real. Like we were." She looked up from the drawing, her eyes meeting his. "I don't want a muse, Amara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want an idea or an inspiration. I want you. My reality. If you'll let me, if we can start over. Not as strangers, not as shadows. But as us." Amara closed the small distance between them. She didn't say a word. She simply wrapped her arms around his neck, and he held her tightly, burying his face in her hair. The snow fell harder, muffling the world and creating a cocoon of silence around them. Their embrace was long and still, a silent reconciliation between two people who had been broken and then remade, finding in each other a peace neither thought they deserved. Later, they would walk back toward the city lights together, hand in hand, toward whatever came next. But for now, in that moment, under the soft glow of a street lamp and the endlessly falling snow, nothing else in the world mattered. The garage, quiet and humble, would always be a part of their story, no longer just a memory of shelter, but the sacred ground where healing had begun and love had found its way home.